Welcome back to the channel. As you know, we ask the tough questions like, why are these two soloed here and only this is soloed over here? Okay, how do I edit these presets? I can't write a new note. Why not? What does this do? This little line with the little two dots. If this is legato and these aren't overlapping, will they play legato in the orchestrator? And we give helpful tips like, even if there are notes in here, it will ignore them if this button isn't on. Stay tuned for tips on the Hollywood Orchestrator. Today we're going to look at the Hollywood Orchestrator. To give you an example of what the Orchestrator can do, I can feed it 4 chords and it can do this. Or I could feed it different chords and it'll do this. Which is to say, it is not writing all of your music for you, but it is writing the orchestration for what you're giving it. I've also got another video on, is the orchestrator writing your music for you? Just sort of touching on those issues and that concept. You know, because a lot of people might approach a tool like this and think, well, I don't want the machine to write the music for me, or that's cheating, or some other objection to the whole concept of using the Hollywood Orchestrator as a tool for your orchestrations. So if you're interested in that topic instead of actually using it, then check out that other video. Now, a number of questions came up for me while I was working with the orchestrator. When you open it, it usually opens to the presets. And one of the first questions that I had was, okay, how do I edit these presets? Click the pencil. So you click the pencil and you can start editing things. Let's find something where there's actually a pattern. That's another question. How do you see the patterns? So if you're looking at the presets, you click the X to see the patterns. You close the presets to see the patterns. And then to see the presets again, click the preset at the top. Of course, if you're not in the presets, if you're over here in the play section, you're like, where were those orchestrator presets? You choose perform. And then if you're looking at something else like the zones or something, you'd have to click Hollywood Orchestrator and then click the preset to see the presets. Might also be in the mixer, go back to main. Click the presets. One thing that tripped me up several times was that if I'm looking at the mixer over here and I've got something soloed over here, all of the other instruments will get muted, but the instrument doesn't get soloed that I'm looking at. So I've soloed the harp pluck here. Everything else got muted over here in the mixer panel, but harp pluck isn't soloed. And I can separately solo these other things and they get unmuted. There's no instrument there. So we've got harp pluck and harp harmonics, and both of them are unmuted. But then individually I can solo them and it doesn't change the solos here. So these are independently. Why are these two soloed here and only this is soloed over here? Or none of them are soloed over here. They're just unmuted. Well, basically this is going to override what's happening over here to the extent that if you solo this, it doesn't matter if it's soloed over here. The panel over here is going to solo only what's soloed in green. And a related question is, what if I'm over here and let's say I've moved away from the orchestrator and I'm just looking at all of these and I want to unmute them. I'm like, how do is there a keystroke to unmute all of these at once? No, there's no keystroke to unmute all of them at once. You need to go back to your Hollywood Orchestrator and unsolo them, and then everything will get unmuted at once. Which may mean you have to change sections. If you soloed a woodwinds thing over here and a percussion thing, then you'd have to go back and unsolo each of them. And no, this solo also is independent of this solo and this solo. So there's several different solos and mutes that you need to think about. Speaking of these solos, these are color-coded woodwinds, brass, percussion, and strings in gold, purple, and red. They color code down to here. These are the mute buttons for each of them. So you can mute and unmute with these key switches. And those colors are also color-coded up here. So you'll see there's no brass active. If I pick a brass instrument, then there's the brass and blue, gold, purple, red for strings. The colors are consistent. If an instrument is selected, but there's no pattern, so this is flute's legato, but there's no pattern visible here, it means that whatever you play in will be fed into this arranger mode field, which could be all notes, the lowest, the top, or some other combination of notes here. It will just completely ignore, even if there are notes in here, even if I put a few notes in this pattern, it will ignore them if it's not on. So this is going to get ignored if this button isn't on. And it's going to play whatever I feed it through the arranger mode. It'll play all my notes, the lowest note, the top note, and completely ignore the pattern until I turn the pattern on. You'll also want to notice if those are on. I loaded Symphonic 3 here, and for instance, the violas, if you look at the viola pattern, it is not enabled. So I was listening to it, I was playing some viola notes, or I was playing some notes, and the lowest and top notes are being played by the viola exactly as I played. Even though there was a pattern here, it's because this wasn't enabled. So you can still load presets and pay attention to whether or not the power is enabled for that pattern or not. Percussion is interesting. Let's pick a snare drum here. If we pick a drum and we go concert snare multi, and then you start entering a pattern, like I would like a rim shot, and then a flam, and then an edge, and then a roll, and then you start playing things and it's not playing these notes, it might be because you didn't enable the pattern. So be aware that you still have to turn the pattern on after you write it. While we're here, this gear or cog will set the minimum and maximum dynamic once the note is played. So this is a range that's going to move based on continuous control data, but it will never, when it plays, go below 30. These instrument settings for minimum and maximum don't control whether it plays or not. Those are set up in the zones. So this 3-flute legato slur light might only play if the velocity is above something. There's also a track delay here in case you want to move certain parts earlier. Now, if we do want to edit our pattern, again, click the pencil, and then click the pencil again, because it loads with the arrow, and nothing you do over here is going to allow you to draw until you click the pencil again. So click pencil. The grid will be determined up here, so if I want the grid to be 16ths, I can have a 16th note grid or a quarter note grid to what I quantize it to. And if I want it to be longer, I can drag, and it can drag to the grid or a subdivision. I can create a grid of 4 quarter notes, but the duration of the notes, new notes that I enter, might only be 1/8 notes, like this. I can only put them on a quarter notes, but they're only an 1/8 note long. Or I can continue, again, I can drag them to be different lengths. Their velocity is the slider here, and if you look at the little orange line in the middle of the selected note will get longer or shorter based on the velocity here. Of course, you can change the velocity of a number of notes at a time, and you can drag the duration of a number of notes at a time and change their velocities. And there's a really cool CC area that you can draw in. What does this do? This little line with the little 2 dots. Well, that allows you to draw a straight line. Boom, boom. You can erase notes. Once you select notes, you can copy them. This will copy all here, or this will copy what you've got selected. And then you can paste them either into this pattern or a different pattern. Go over here, we could trash a pattern, and we could paste what we copied. If we want to select it and move it to a different part, we can move it that way. You can change the length of your pattern. Change your time signature. Of course, there's undo and redo. Now there's a voice 2 over here. I haven't gotten it to work. I would love it if someone put in the comments how they get voice 2 working. Not did you try this, but actually tell me how to get it to work, because I read the manual. I wasn't able to get voice 2 to ever play any notes, no matter how many I entered in here. So let me know if you can get voice 2 working, because there's clearly something I'm missing about it. A couple things about the presets themselves and how to work with them. If you find that there's a legato in your preset that you opened, try looking at what their arranger mode is and making that part a legato part and just seeing how the orchestration responds to that. So here's a sustain, but here's a legato, and they're both using the lowest note. Maybe you want to make the cello have a legato instead. If you're going to have the lowest note be legato, maybe you want the cellos to be legato and the violins to be legato. So this was trying to do legato for this pattern. And because it's legato, if you connect, that's an interesting idea. So if this is legato and these aren't overlapping, will they play legato in the orchestrator? The answer is I think it's trying to play legato there. Let's see what the cello do. Switch to pencil. Yes, it's going to play a legato pattern if you've got the legato patch selected, even though these don't look like overlapping notes in the pattern. If you just hold down your legato of holding down the chord, I'm holding down an F minor chord. Notice how different that sounds from the cello sustains. You can especially hear it when the part wraps into the beginning of the pattern again. What else did I want to show you? Another thing to note is what it plays is greatly affected by the number of notes you feed it at a time. So if I feed it one note, these patterns might sound a little weird. I've given it 3 different steps of notes to play, but I am only playing 1 pitch. Now I'm going to play 2 pitches. It's effectively going up octaves. And now I'm going to give it 3 pitches. Now it can actually do the 3 steps up and down because the pattern goes up and down because I'm playing 3 notes. Another thing to point out is that if you've got a complex set of individual chords, and what I've done here is extend this G to the duration of all of the G's that we're playing. If you have every note always reattack every chord, you're only restarting the orchestrator pattern every time. So if every time you're playing every chord is a new attack, even if notes are repeating and effectively being common tones across chords, you're not getting the full duration of a preset pattern. So I tend to pull these durations unless I want to restart the pattern. You know, I could have restarted the whole pattern here by restarting this G, but I wanted to allow the pattern, if it was looping, to continue looping. And that also helps with 7/8 patterns in 4/4 time, or 5/8 or 3/4 patterns. They can sound pretty good, even if you're working in a different time signature than they were written, if you allow them to play out. Not always, but it's something to experiment with. You don't necessarily want orchestrations to restart every time, every chord, if there's common tones across chords, and if you can keep the pattern going. On the other hand, notice most of these have 4 notes at a time, but this chord here only has 3 notes at a time. That might mess up with some of the presets where you might get a pattern that's going around 4 notes, 4 notes, 4 notes, and when it switches to 3 notes, it sounds like the orchestration messed up. It's because you're feeding it a different number of notes. So just pay attention to the number of notes you're feeding your orchestration, so that if the pattern changes, it might be because of the notes that you're giving it. A couple of these are pretty obvious things once you start playing with it. I'm just pointing them out to you in case you haven't played it with it yet and you're just looking for tips and pointers and you don't want to get frustrated. Hopefully this helps relieve some frustration or helps get people more comfortable with some of the basic features. If you've got any questions or any tips or tricks to share with others, please put them in the comments. I'll end this here and have a good day. I hope this was helpful.